I looked everywhere and ordered every single natural toothpaste I could find. And many of them had products that I wouldn't really consider favorable to the microbiome. Petroleum products or sodium lauryl sulfate, both of those are irritants. And then most of them, if not all of them, honestly, at that point, didn't have anything that would strengthen enamel. And that's the whole point of using toothpaste. So honestly, Nano-Hydroxyapatite, the 10%, the right size particles, it's a great paste for people, for our patients who are avoiding fluoride, because they're out there and they're growing.
Probably another good caution for hygienists when they're doing research. They should understand that there is some information out there for their consumers and for themselves that can be not necessarily true. So anytime a brand is putting anything out there, ask for a clinical study.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome everyone into today's episode. It is a special bonus episode brought to you in part by Dr. Jen's Natural Toothpaste. I'm your host, Andrew Johnston. Thank you for joining me today. In this episode, I really enjoyed our conversation. It felt really nice to have a roundtable or a panel type discussion. We had three guests. We had Dr. Jen, we had Gabe, and we had Peter. And largely the conversation revolved around nano-hydroxyapatite and its importance in toothpaste and in dentistry. In fact, I have listed in the show notes for you all a list that was provided by Peter of a ton of links that dives really deep into the research of nano-hydroxyapatite. And one of the reasons that I thought that was a really good idea to include that was almost every conference that you go to now has a topic or has a course on nano-hydroxyapatite. And what does that mean? What are our patients seeing? And so because it's so topical and so relevant right now, I think sometimes we like to do our own research, and there's a whole list of things for you guys to research yourselves rather than giving your patients anecdotal evidence, right? So please be sure to use that as a resource. I also really enjoyed hearing about the process of creating a toothpaste from scratch and just the thought and the care that goes into every single ingredient. We never really give it a second thought. Like, really think back to the last patient sample that you gave to your patient. Do you really know what's inside that tube? I mean, do you even care? Do you think about it? I think a lot of us in this situation, we just kind of just put it in the bag and give it to the patient without really giving it a second thought, unless we've had that patient who had an adverse reaction, or like this, a family member was personally affected. Really just a great reminder to be present in the moment when we're giving our recommendations to our patients. Don't go into autopilot and just customize the tools that they need to take home. They said it in the episode as well. I really couldn't agree anymore. But if you want to know more about them or about nano-hydroxyapatite, their products, I am sure that they would love to answer those questions. So please reach out to them with the links that we have in the show notes for their contact information. They also mention their contact information at the end of the episode. Thank you so much for listening and enjoy this episode.
A tale of two hygienists.
Welcome everyone into the interview portion of the podcast. Really excited to be here. It's not often that I have multiple people on an interview. I'm so excited right now. We're going to interview Dr. Jen and her family. I'm really excited to bring this in. Doctor, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Andrew.
So we also have on, we're going to hear a little bit later, we'll hear from Gabe and possibly Peter. But before we get into all that, I just want to know the story. Like, who are you? Where are you coming from?
Absolutely. Well, my name is Dr. Jennifer. That's what people say, just because my last name is so tough to say. And so it's been my name for a long time. And so I am an orthodontist in St. Paul, Minnesota. I have a full-time practice in the area. I've been a practicing orthodontist for over 20 years. I graduated from the University of Minnesota. I have been a practice owner all of that time, and just really during the COVID time had a little more time to, I guess, explore this idea of a clean ingredient toothpaste that would remineralize teeth.
I think it's interesting, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but orthodontists and hygienists, I have like a really high respect for orthodontists. I've always had an orthodontist in all of my offices. They would be in their own little orthodontic bay, but there was a lot of collaboration between the orthodontist and the hygiene team because we're so focused on prevention, prevention, prevention. And I would imagine that's pretty strong, in your heart.
Absolutely. I've actually always had an incentive program in my own office for my patients where they would earn tokens and rewards for having good hygiene. And,
Yeah.
we've always, from a orthodontic standpoint, it's really hard for a hygienist to clean around the wires. So we've always removed the wires for our patients so that when they go and see their hygienist, it's easier to clean.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing that. Obviously in our offices, we had the ortho cassette that they just bring over, and then maybe the assistants would do, or doctor would come and do her check over there, and they would take out the wires for us, like right in front of it, which is kind of fun. And it's interesting to see. Before we get into some of the cool science things that we have, tell us a little bit about why you are journeying down this path of a new product.
Absolutely. It all started around the COVID time in 2020. Our daughter, who is currently a dental student as well, she's actually seeing patients in the dental school, so couldn't join us today. But at the time, she had contracted C. diff, which is it's a pretty tricky disease to actually get and to treat. But essentially, it happened from an overprescription of antibiotics, and it essentially wipes out your microbiome. And so she was, I guess, went to Mayo Clinic and was there for several days while the doctors had told us that she essentially needed to start over. So it's almost like a baby. She couldn't take chemicals of any type, and had to watch what she ate and also the products that she used. And so at that time, I thought, okay, no problem. I can find, a nice natural remineralizing toothpaste that would protect her enamel, and looked everywhere. And ordered every single natural toothpaste I could find. And many of them had products that I wouldn't really consider favorable to the microbiome, petroleum products or sodium lauryl sulfate. Both of those are irritants. And then most of them, if not all of them, honestly, at that point, didn't have anything that would strengthen enamel. And that's the whole point of using toothpaste. And so I thought, okay, this is not good. And again, COVID and the quarantine and all of that. So I had some time and eventually looked around and hired a chemist. He was a retired chemist from a big box toothpaste company that you would know. And he was retired, and contacted him and just said, hey, this is something I'm thinking about. Can you help? And he was so excited actually to get in there and help. He's like, this is a great idea. And so he would send buckets of this, toothpaste, and I would, get in there and, oh, don't like this, don't like that. And we went, back and forth, lots of UPS boxes and shipments, and finally created one that has really what I would consider healthy, safe, natural ingredients that are very helpful, I guess, to the microbiome. They're not going to hurt the microbiome, and the toothpaste will remineralize.
It's incredible. You would think though that of all the hundreds of varieties that are out there, all the ones that specialize and market in the natural or the health magazines and the stores, that there would have already been an option out there.
That's what I was so surprised about, to be honest. If you're not going to use fluoride, and obviously fluoride is one of the remineralizing agents that we're all kind of know and love, but there are patients out there that just don't want it. And so the other opportunity to remineralize is called Nano-Hydroxyapatite. And there is one toothpaste that was, I think, developed 40 years ago in Japan that puts nano-hydroxyapatite in their toothpaste. And there's been actually a lot of studies that have shown that nano-hydroxyapatite is just as strong as fluoride. As long as it's in the right concentration and the right particle size, it's just as strong as fluoride at remineralizing. But it's catching on a little bit in Europe and maybe slowly getting, turning the wheel here in the United States. But it's something that I am so excited to bring forward. I also want to tell you that the other piece that I wanted after I tried all these natural pastes is, honestly, I didn't like the taste of really any of them. And so I put it in. It's like, oh, this is not a pleasurable brushing experience. And so that was one of the caveats that that I really wanted is, please, let's make this paste taste good so that people will want to use it.
So did you go the typical mint spearmint route, or did you go like beyond that?
I went beyond that a little bit. I mean, there is mint in there because honestly, spearmint is actually really good for our gut and good for our body. But so there is some spearmint in there, but there's also some black cherry and some papaya. And then we have a kid's version that doesn't have any mint because I know some people don't like mint. And so that version is just a strawberry essential oil.
Can you walk me through? Well, by the way, I have a vision of all these UPS boxes coming back into this tub, and you're like, you have to try it
I know.
yourself, and I'm like, you're just, oh, you're so brave. Can you walk me though through, because working with a chemist, I would assume even the most intelligent people like yourself would maybe not quite understand all of the components of what the chemist is talking about versus what you're talking about. So how did you guys walk through the steps of these are the ingredients I do want and these are the ingredients we cannot have?
That was honestly a lot of research. And this has truly been a family passion project. I have 3 kids. 2 of them are currently in dental school. Gabe is one of them. He's on this call. And of course my husband also helped out there as well. But we really knew what we wanted and more importantly what we didn't want in there, and then working with the chemist and saying, okay, no sodium lauryl sulfate, no petroleum products. I didn't want artificial flavoring because again, artificial, it just doesn't do the job. And so the essential oils is really what I was shooting for. And if you're using essential oils, then you've got to think about how do you preserve it, and then you have to think about what kind of tube you're using so that oxygen doesn't go inside of it. And so there was lots of, you'd make one decision and then you'd have to go down a different alley to figure out something else.
It's absolutely fascinating for sure. My wife is a little bit sensitive to artificial flavors.
Yes.
And I can have like a Diet Coke and then I'll have her drink it up. She'll be like, oh, this is like the worst thing ever. And I don't even taste it. And so my son has taken a lot of that also. And I think that I don't know if it's growing, but there's a big population out there that are very sensitive to artificial. So I'm glad that you're going in that direction.
Yeah.
Maybe this is be a good time to bring in Gabe a little bit and talk about his contributions and kind of where he fits into this puzzle.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having us, by the way. And I'm Gabe, and I just completed my master's at Roseman University in biomedical sciences, and I'm going to be going to dental school there as well. And during the master's program, I was very fortunate to be able to conduct a lot of research. And the research topic that I decided to research was particularly nano-hydroxyapatite and tooth remineralization and all the different applications that nano-hydroxyapatite can basically be used for your teeth.
How did you find a lot of this research? Because I would imagine that, 40 years ago, they had this kind of maybe resurgence in Japan. It's a little bit talked about now in maybe some of the publications in the US, but it's not really out there for like public consumption and things like that in any large quantity. So how did you find your research?
Yeah, the easiest way to gain access to the resources now are just going to like resources like PubMed, very publicly scholarly sources, or even you can go to Google Scholar, but mainly I was using PubMed for the resources. And what was really great about it is that you can just type in nano-hydroxyapatite and remineralization or dentin hypersensitivity or anything like that, and there will be now there's hundreds of articles that are coming up because it's becoming a very new kind of area of research. There's in the past 10 years, it's substantially grown as far as the research for nano-hydroxyapatite, which is really exciting for the field.
Now, doctor was mentioning though that, it's not just nano-hydroxyapatite, it's a very specific kind. And so where did you find that in your research, and how can someone know if it's the right kind or not the right kind?
Yeah, absolutely. So while researching, there's systematic reviews basically also. And some really nice components of these systematic reviews are they break down the different particle sizes, for example, of hydroxyapatite. And as we know, hydroxyapatite, it represents over 90% of our enamel, over 60% of our dentin as well. And basically what hydroxyapatite is calcium and phosphate and a hydroxy group, essentially. And while researching this, we found that there's two parameters that need to be met in order for it to be as effective at remineralization as fluoride. And one of them is the particle size. So while going through these research articles, you can see that they test whether it's a microparticle, a nanoparticle, and well, just hydroxyapatite is the same as a microparticle essentially. It's 1,000 times larger than a nanoparticle. And if you read through the literature on it, it shows that, you know, microparticles or just regular hydroxyapatite, the particle size is significantly larger. It's too large to actually remineralize the teeth. It won't actually do it. It won't do anything nearly as effective as nano-hydroxyapatite. It won't be able to go into the dentin tubules and be absorbed there essentially. And so that's one of the parameters. Additionally, they tested different concentrations. So they had at a 1%, 2%, 5%, 10, and continuing on 15% different concentrations of nano-hydroxyapatite. And what was found was that the optimal concentration for it to be just as effective as fluoride at remineralization is that 10% concentration as well.
So 15% more isn't better?
No, it's actually the same. It levels out once you get to that 10% concentration.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So now, and this might be a really dumb question for maybe not the smart people like myself. So when we talk about efficacy is the same effectiveness as fluoride as far as that. Did it also measure hardness? Because we talk a lot about hardness.
Absolutely. And that was actually one of the main measurements used throughout different studies was measuring microhardness. And I wish I remembered the technique that they used to measure it, but it's a technique that's been used for over 100 years for testing microhardness. They use like a diamond basically to compress the tooth, and it measures the microhardness. And they measured it essentially. What most of these studies would do is they would have, for example, 100 extracted teeth, 100 extracted molars, and then they'd separate them into 5 different groups. And they'd want to make sure that these teeth didn't have any crazed white lesions, or these teeth were essentially very normal. There weren't any caries or anything like that. And then they inserted them into demineralization solution for, it could be 3 minutes to 12 hours. And then afterwards, they would apply this remineralization agent. And then after doing that, they would test the microhardness levels between each step. So they'd have it at baseline, they test that microhardness, and then after demineralization, and then after remineralization, what they found was after that remineralization using that nano-hydroxyapatite at 10% level, it remineralizes a tooth for one, and additionally, it significantly increases the microhardness.
That's amazing. Gabe, I'm so glad you came on the show. That's some really good information right there. We're going to pivot back to doctor for just a quick minute though, because I'm audience here is mostly hygienists, right? And I feel like we learn this information, we understand how important it is, and then we have to have a discussion with patients in our chairs, right? So can you walk me through a conversation, talking to a patient who maybe isn't necessarily like, anti-fluoride and not like the low hanging fruit, like the easy ones, well, here's your replacement, but the ones that probably really should be considering this as their normal alternative to, whatever else is out there. How does that conversation go with the patients?
I want to tell you in answering that question is that we do have a fluoride-free paste for patients who really want to avoid fluoride. But we also have a paste that combines fluoride and nano-hydroxyapatite, and we call that super paste. And so honestly, nano-hydroxyapatite, the 10%, the right size particles, it's a great paste for our patients who are avoiding fluoride because they're out there and they're growing. Our youngest son, who's not here, he's a college student, and he came back from college and he said, I don't want fluoride. I'm not going to drink this water. And so it's coming, and I see it in my own practice with my own patients. There are people that don't want fluoride, and so that's why we have a fluoride free. But we do have the super paste that has a combination of fluoride and nano-hydroxyapatite. And when you bring those two together, it's just one extra level of protection. It works great for patients who have sensitivity, and it works great for patients who have xerostomia, which means they just don't have enough saliva or any saliva at all to protect the teeth. So we actually have two kinds.
Well, so this is going to bring me back to maybe again, maybe it's a dumb question, but so when I think back to our little, you have all these like these receptor sites and the things are binding. You would think though that the fluoride and the nano-hydroxyapatite is competing for the same space. Is that not true?
It's not true. They actually work in combination. I might have young Gabe answer that question because he's really good at explaining this part.
I don't know about that, but just to build off of that a little bit, as we know, the way that fluoride acts is it binds to our enamel and essentially, well, when our teeth are demineralized, we have that acid, and that acid breaks down that hydroxyapatite into phosphate and calcium. And those are the minerals that are essentially being demineralized. And that's the same component of hydroxyapatite. And what fluoride does is it'll bond to our enamel. And what's going to happen is fluoride actually recruits calcium and phosphate from our saliva. Our saliva is super saturated with calcium and phosphate, and that's where it's getting those minerals. However, when we have patients who have xerostomia or dry mouth, those patients no longer have that saliva production. And so they need to have a different source for those minerals. And that's where the nano-hydroxyapatite comes into play. When you combine it with fluoride, if you look at the research studies on it, it shows that having those two combined, nano-hydroxyapatite with fluoride, significantly increases remineralization, which is really great.
Genius. I love it. So that's why it's called super paste. That makes a lot more sense. Okay, so let's go back to our patient base here. So our hygienists are talking, are they using Cambra and classifying their patients into low risk, moderate risk, and high risk before they're recommending something like a super paste? Or is that also safe enough, effective enough for just regular prevention measures?
It's absolutely safe enough for regular, prevention as well. And it tastes great, really clean ingredients, no artificial flavoring. It's a great overall general paste.
All right, Peter, how we doing, buddy?
You're doing great. I don't think I'm needed here today, but I'll be happy to help your audience in any way I can.
What have we missed so far?
Yeah. So, Andrew, I think the big picture of things and just my role in particular, when Jennifer's in the clinic seeing patients and Gabe's in dental school and our daughter's in dental school, throughout the day, there's somebody who has to hold down the fort. And I'm on the front lines helping dental offices get the toothpaste in their office. And I'm fielding a lot of questions. And I think the biggest thing for your audience is that, yeah, nano-hydroxyapatite, even though it's been around for 40 years, it's widely accepted in the medical profession. It's used to diagnose cancer. It's used in the orthopedic space. They're coating artificial joints with hydroxyapatite. Oral surgeons are coating implants with hydroxyapatite. So hydroxyapatite, even though it's fairly new to the dental industry, it's been around for a long time. It's clinically proven. And so, as Gabe had mentioned, there is so many clinical studies. And so I think the audience needs to be confident, especially if they reference these clinical studies, that this isn't some new ingredient. It's been around for a while and it is clinically proven. And they should feel really confident if they're going to recommend a toothpaste with nano-hydroxyapatite. And as Gabe indicated and Jennifer indicated, you have to have the right concentration and particle size. And so I get a lot of questions, and we don't speak of other brands, but the other takeaway with this is if you take fluoride out of toothpaste, fluoride is considered a medicine. The FDA doesn't regulate nano-hydroxyapatite toothpaste. And so unfortunately within this space, and this was part of the reason Jennifer created this toothpaste, there are a lot of brands out there that are brilliant. They're venture capitalist backed, and they're creating products with diluted concentrations, maybe 1% to 3%, or they're using wrong particle sizes. So I think that's really important for the hygienist and the dentist that listen to this, that, yeah, they understand that it does work. However, there's ways to water down the toothpaste or cheapen it where patients can end up putting themselves in a worse situation if they believe they're buying a quote unquote hydroxyapatite or nano-hydroxyapatite toothpaste. So there should be a little.
Peter, sorry, I'm going to cut you off, Peter, but how would I know if they're doing that? How would I know if there's 3%, 5%, or 10%?
This is really good, Andrew. Most brands don't offer transparency. And so that's the first thing a consumer should do. If it's not listed on their website, they should ask the brand directly. And if the brand is not willing to share that information, it's going to be suspect. And we try to offer transparency on all of our ingredients, and we support it with the clinical studies. And there are other good brands out there. We're not saying Dr. Jens is the only good brand out there. However, as a consumer, as a hygienist, these are questions that should be answered by the brand they're recommending. And
I
then,
love it.
I do have to add, just this whole thing on the fact that it's not regulated by the FDA. When Jennifer started this process, one of the comments her chemist had said, who's been in the toothpaste industry for a while, says, "Look, you are entering the Wild West. The moment you take fluoride out of toothpaste, the FDA doesn't regulate it, and you're entering a space where people are doing some crazy things, which is kind of sad for the consumer's sake." And so there are also myths out there. So when the hygienists and consumers are Googling nano-hydroxyapatite, there's going to be some misinformation out there. And one that I'll leave you with was glycerin. And I think that's a question I get almost every day by hygienists and consumers. Does glycerin stop mineral uptake? Well, Gabe will be happy to share the study with you. Glycerin does not stop mineral uptake. It's beneficial for patients with xerostomia. But more importantly, if you read the clinical studies supporting nano-hydroxyapatite as a remineralizing ingredient equivalent to fluoride, they're using a glycerin-based toothpaste. And so that's probably another good caution for hygienists when they're doing research. They should understand that there is some information out there for their consumers and for themselves that can be not necessarily true. So anytime a brand is putting anything out there, ask for a clinical study. And that's one of the things that Dr. Jen's really good at in our brand, is that everything that we suggest or we claim, we're going to back it with a third-party, non-funded clinical study.
And I can testify, by the way, that you guys have a ton of research that you've sent me before this call. Peter was sending me this thing and I was like, oh my gosh, is that 10 or 15 links that I have there? So I'm going to put that in the show notes for all the listeners out there. So if you're interested, you can go just click on the title of the episode and then usually bring up your show notes. Gabe, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that study or not. I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, one area that I think should be brushed up on a little bit that I know that we haven't talked about actually, if it's okay, is dentin hypersensitivity. And that's just another added benefit of nano-hydroxyapatite, are for those patients out there that have hypersensitivity from drinking cold or warm drinks. Usually they're using a toothpaste that has potassium nitrate in it. And what potassium nitrate essentially does is it's a pain blocker. And so it goes through your enamel dentin and goes to that, well, it goes through your dentin tubules more specifically, and goes to that nerve and essentially blocks that nerve from reaching an action potential. The difference between that and how nano-hydroxyapatite interacts is basically it goes into those dentin tubules and just fill those up, because that's exactly what's causing that sensitivity. It remineralizes those dentin tubules. And so there's studies out there that you'll see that after 2 weeks it will significantly decrease sensitivity after 4 weeks of using it, and so over time it will decrease. And then additionally, with those studies out there, there's plenty of research studies on glycerin specifically as far as remineralization. And it's really funny because if you look at the research studies, practically all of the nano-hydroxyapatite toothpaste that they use in these studies, they're using it with glycerin as well. And all of them show across the board that, yes, it does remineralize the teeth. It increases microhardness. And so it's really interesting that patients are asking, or there's some miscommunication from other toothpaste companies on remineralization.
So Andrew, I have to ask you, Gabe mentioned potassium nitrate, which is commonly used in sensitivity toothpaste. Do you know where potassium nitrate is also used typically?
Couldn't tell you.
Gunpowder. Not something you want to necessarily put in your mouth.
And fertilizer.
Depends on your objective, doctor.
Fertilizer.
Fertilizers.
There you go.
So it sounds like, there's a wide range of people that this would be good for. Historically in dental offices, there's kind of two modes of a way to purchase a product, right? So you can either go usually online or in big box store or through your dealer rep. How can our audience, hygienist, and or the patients that they recommend it to find the product and purchase it?
Can I speak to that, Andrew? Yeah. So when Jennifer first launched the toothpaste, it was really a passion project for her family, friends, and her patients. And so she started selling it online, and then eventually we were contacted by an Amazon distributor. So she had at Dr. Jen Natural, anybody can purchase the toothpaste. So any of your patients can purchase it. She also sells it. She sells it to an Amazon distributor that sells it on Amazon. And it was about 3 months ago that we started getting contacted by dental offices throughout the country that had been using her product. And they loved it so much that they were recommending it to their patients. And they asked us if we would sell it wholesale to dental clinics. And so at the request of dental offices asking to buy her toothpaste at wholesale, we just launched selling wholesale. So if anybody is out there, they want to at least try some samples, we'd be happy to send them samples. Just go to drjennatural.com, hit the professional link. We can send some samples to a dental clinic to try. On that link, they're also allowed to go in and purchase the toothpaste at wholesale, which is 40% off, and that will allow them to sell the toothpaste in office.
Which, by the way, as a hygienist, that's very empowering. If I don't have to send my patient to one more spot to get the thing that they may or may not get, but I can just grab it from my drawer and say, here, patient, let's walk up to the front. It's a done deal. And they'll get the thing that they need. So I'm appreciative that you guys have thought of that. Any last thoughts? Any last comments about anything?
Yeah, Andrew, if I can a little bit, I know Jennifer didn't get into this. Having a remineralizing ingredient is essential part of Jennifer's toothpaste. One of the things she didn't get a chance to speak about was, on these iterations that she did, she focused on the toothpaste. It's more complicated than most people think. A lot of people think, well, I want to brush with a toothpaste that's going to help keep my enamel strong. There is so many other areas that she spent developing her toothpaste. That is pH balancing. You want a pH balancing toothpaste. She talked about the oral microbiome. She has a proprietary formulation that not only does it help manage halitosis and kill bacteria on the tongue, but it also helps fight gingivitis. I mean, there's clinical studies tied into benefits of peppermint oil. But where I'm going with this here is the remineralizing is an essential component of Dr. Jen's toothpaste. In addition to that, she really put a lot of thought into the whole package. This toothpaste offers so many benefits, oral care benefits, that are needed for pretty much everybody's oral health.
I do get asked almost every day about the pH and the hardness, the RDA level of the toothpaste, and the pastes are very neutral. And so our fluoride free is around 7.1. Our super paste has a pH of around 7.4. And then the RDA hardness level is 44. And so it's very gentle. It's strong enough to remove the plaque, but not so strong that it's hurting the enamel.
And just for reference on your RDA scales, the closer to 0 you are, the better it is, the safer it is.
It can go beyond that, but so it's an RDA score, relative dent and abrasivity score. So you're absolutely right. The lower the number, the less abrasive. And most dentists, I think, to say below 50 it's fairly safe. Most whitening toothpaste, we didn't even get into that. It's an excess of 200.
Now, sometimes, our audience will have questions. Maybe they're not ready to purchase, but they want to have clarification on the episode. Is there a way that they could contact you that's easy?
We have an email, info@drjennatural.com. They're welcome to reach out.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Well, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is a tale, oh yeah, a tale of two hygienists. So there might be only one, bringing the best of dental knowledge, and we do it all with ease. We cover oral health and screening, and preventing gum disease. We're gonna do a lot of learning, and have a little bit of fun working at the dentist. A tale of two hygienists.